right now, this time of year is the absolute best time to plant. So I would say any time from probably November all the way until February, maybe early March. But in my personal opinion, kind of late January to early March is the absolute best time to plant. And the reason for that, at least in our area, is Dean Family Acres. Alright guys, so today we're planting a Spalding pear. You might have checked out our video before where we actually grafted this Bradford pear into something useful and put a lot of different southern, somewhat low chill hour varieties on that, as well as our 3-pear planting video. I'll link those down below and as well as up here throughout the video. But Spalding, we were actually lucky enough to pick up from Trusty Farms in South Carolina, and they were actually at a fig growers meetup that we went to just outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And it actually was a great event, but not only did we score several figs as we highlighted, but we also got this really cool pear tree. What makes Spalding unique is that it has a little bit of a variety from Asian as well as European. It is a European pear, but when you kind of start to look at those profiles, which we'll talk about throughout the video, this is a great unique variety. And if you have fire blight problems, from our research, you really don't have issues with fire blight either. So check this out as we get this planted in the ground today. If you like the crunchy, juicy sweetness of an Asian pear and the mellow, complex flavor of a European pear, you'll love Spalding. A healthy, vigorous tree that produces loads of medium-sized, round, light green fruit in early September. It's originally from the South, and it thrives in the Pacific Northwest, and even gardeners in Florida grow it. This European pear is partially self-fertile and fire blight resistant. It's also considered a low chill, needing only approximately 150 hours to reliably bloom and set fruit. It is hardy all the way down to zone 5. All this information was gathered from the Growing Fruit forum. I would encourage you, if you're looking for some unique varieties, to go check out that forum. I'll actually link it down below as well. We found a lot of different highlighted information and even people sourcing that Growing Fruit forum back for resources. And when you're looking for resources, don't just immediately go to social media, because a lot of times you might get wrong information, and not that you can't on a forum, but a lot of times with a forum you can kind of trace back exactly where that growing pattern, how things went, because people like to document that all in one place. So again, check out the Growing Fruit forum. In today's video, we're going to be covering a couple of different things, and one of those primary is just highlighting the Spalding pear, but second of all is how to plant a pear tree, as well as where exactly you might want to find that proper location in your yard. If you have a farm or something like that, you certainly want to think about that as well, but a lot of times folks are just looking to put some form of fruit into their backyard orchard, and this is a great opportunity to be able to do that, and we'll kind of talk through exactly where might be a great spot for that and where might not be. Some of you who have watched our videos for quite some time might have remembered the European and Asian pear planting video. That was really early on, and these are results. We've kind of shown some highlights and some shorts, that kind of thing, pruning last year, and also just the walk around. This is our Kiefer. There's a Bartlett, and then there is a giant Olympic down at the end. I would honestly say that the Bartlett has taken off the most. I'll show you that here in just a little bit. But the Kiefer here is often one that you see throughout the South. If you see one planted, a lot of times it's going to be a Kiefer. And the Spalding is often referred to as a little bit better or superior to the Kiefer. So again, if this is what you're used to, you definitely might want to check out this Spalding. Next, let's look at exactly where we're going to be planting this Spalding pear and why we chose this site. All right guys, so you can see here, here, and here we have our 3 pear trees that I was just referring to: Giant Olympic, Bartlett, and Kiefer. Those are all pears, and then just here to the side, right here, is the Bradford that we actually grafted multiple different varieties onto. You kind of see that these pears are in a line. There's apple trees up this way, which I'll show you in just a second. But that Bradford that we grafted is kind of the next row. And trying to figure out exactly how you want to have this layout. Any of you guys who, I won't say we have limited property, but we've got limited area in regards to thinking through and designing how and where you want to put things. And so I've got this other row here that you would think, okay, well, just put it in this row. Well, I've started plums here, and the plums are going to be 2 to 3 rows of plums, and they're going to be kind of tightly spaced. We're going to keep those pruned compact. So I'd like to keep the pears together. So you might be thinking, well, why don't you just put it right over here? Well, that's a good idea in theory, but when you kind of start thinking about future plans and future thoughts and where we might think of putting things, I have a dream of eventually putting a small greenhouse right here in this area. And if I put that pear tree approximately where I'm standing, which would be a good triangle, kind of offset pattern like I'm doing everything else with these other pears, it would look good and it would be in line. However, it would not work with the greenhouse because it would provide too much shade eventually. As you know, a lot of pear trees do end up getting pretty large unless you keep them pruned way down. That's why it won't work here and why we're going to plant it back up over here. That leads me back in between the Bartlett and the Kiefer and kind of thinking through, all right, we've already got these approximately 20 feet apart. So what exactly are you doing over here, and why would you think that you might be able to squeeze that in? Well, I've got another idea. Back next to the fence there, you can see that we've started to open that up some. My goal is to open that up probably maybe about 15 or 20 feet back, and then that way that will give us enough room for at least one more row of fruit trees, if not 2 more rows. So that's my goal, and this will be the first tree going in that row. Let me kind of talk through exactly why we chose that place and why you might not want to, depending on what your future goals are in your time frame. This area here is at the top of a hill, somewhat. Basically our front yard kind of goes down to a bottom, and you don't necessarily want to put one at a bottom just because of the cold and how much that will hold. So think about that, and depending on your topography of your property, exactly what might be the best fit for that. You don't always necessarily want to put it at the top of a hill, but we do have a windbreak here in multiple different ways. The other thing is, let's look at this from a perspective of sun versus shade and how that's going to work. Typically you want to have at least 6 to 8 or even more hours for any kind of fruit tree. I tend to try and encourage at least 8 to 10, but again, everybody's working with different possibilities and why you're thinking about that. And how we're able to potentially work through that in some ways is we're able to actually stagger how we've got some of these trees planted. I talked about that earlier, but let's kind of follow through and see if we can kind of look at this in a little bit more intricate fashion. You can see this row of plums here, and they're planted in a straight line and they're pretty tightly spaced. I'm doing that for a couple different reasons, but mainly because I wanted to have multiple different types of plums, and I wanted to keep them all, again, in a tight location. But they're also staggered from these other trees. So you'll notice there's some spacing here. The other thing is, plum trees don't get nearly as large as pear trees, so that's why I put those on the front. The sun rises over here in the east and sets over here in the west. So essentially it kind of comes over the top here, and that staggering allows for the trees to not necessarily shade out because of the way it works. In the winter time, because of the way that the sun, well, the earth actually tilts a little bit differently, the sun actually comes up directly like this. That kind of gives you a general idea and why this might work in regards to our location. If it was reversed and the sun came up on this back side, then most definitely this location would not work because the trees behind it would shade it out. Now there's one other thing that you got to think through when you're planting closer to your forested trees. That's squirrels. One of our nemesises here has been squirrels. They've eaten our muscadines, They ate all of our peaches last year, and I'm sure as soon as some of these other things start producing, they're gonna start trying to eat those. That's gonna be step one in regards to making sure we start taking care of that population a little bit here in our area. But you do want to think about that. What other pests or problems might you have if you're right near a forest or wood line? Could be squirrels, it could be deer, it could be other things, but you just want to make sure and kind of think through that when you're looking at that specific location that you want to put your tree. So you might be thinking, all right, Matt, so why in the world are you planting over here near that fence line? Remember I mentioned before, we're hoping to be able to kind of clear out at least maybe 10 to 20 feet back from this fence line. I've slowly done that, but that's kind of our goal. We do further down have some blueberries planted, but they will certainly be fine. If these were our only blueberries and I wanted more production, then I would certainly be a little more concerned in regards to putting more trees around them and potentially shading them out. However, we've got probably 200 plus feet of blueberries at this point, with plans to add at least one more row, if not two, up here in front of everything. Again, remember your heights. Where's your sun coming from? Those blueberries don't get nearly as tall as the plum trees, and the plum trees don't get nearly as tall as your pear trees. So if you're going to be planting a tree, you for sure need a shovel, and you're going to need some compost. You're probably going to need some pine bark soil conditioner if you were planting in mostly clay. If you don't have specific mulch, you definitely need to have some organic matter. There's always argument / difference of opinion in regards to, do you change the soil composition that you're planting into, or do you just put it in the hole? And in reality, it's probably 6 one, half dozen of another, and trying to figure out exactly what's your best bet there. I always amend my holes at least a little bit. These trees, unless they're bare root is kind of a mixed bag too, but I still amend my soil. And if they're growing in a pot, even if it's just a, we're gonna plant some rootstock with a grafted variety on it, and it's still in its little tree pot, it's growing in a modified soil. So this is definitely not all clay, and I would encourage you, especially if you're planting in red clay, you want to amend it some. However, you want to be careful about how and what you're doing when you're digging that hole. So let's go to the next part of the process, and that is digging the hole. Give you a few tips and tricks there. Remember when I mentioned that this wasn't necessarily your typical location? I was exactly right. When I step it off, it's pretty much right at this post. So I think what we're gonna do, for one thing, I know that there was a huge cedar tree right here not too long ago, because I took it out to start opening up this space. And when I used the tractor to kind of smooth all this out, it's back when we had the backhoe, and that's actually how I got it out. Speaking of which, if you didn't watch that video on the backhoe from last week, I'd encourage you to check that out. And I really appreciate my good buddy for being willing to let us use that, and also just have a review of it being something a little bit different. Back to the hole. If you're in clay, then you want to not just create a bowl for water to sit in. So you could, I'd encourage you, if you're not used to what you're planting, where you're planting, etc., dig your hole, pour some water in it. If it doesn't drain, you definitely need to make sure and kind of modify what you're doing and plant high. Most trees fail because people plant them too low, and the roots just don't spread out and they don't do well. So I would strongly encourage you, make sure, especially in clay, that you're planting high enough. Back to your hole, you want to dig that hole at least twice as wide and at least 1.5 times as deep as your container. So for us, we've just got that tree pot. That won't be a problem, but I'll still probably dig a pretty decent sized hole to make sure that the roots are going to be able to spread out, and then once they hit that regular soil that's not fully amended, then they will do okay. Another thing is you want to try and make sure that your hole is not a complete circle. Doing that in a square shape, I've always been told it could just be one of those old grandpa said this, or grandma in my situation, but you have those corners. If you're squaring it off, the root hits that corner and it's going to go and try and go through that. If it hits the circle, it might just keep circling up. So here we go. Now let's get to digging. Alright guys, as you can see here, we got the hole dug. It did not do a real good job of getting it square, but it's squarer than you think. One of the next things you want to check is going to be your soil height. So if you get a little closer in here, if you look, you can see the height that soil is. And this one was grafted really high, which is totally fine. You just want to make sure that anything that grows from here all the way down to the soil, or even comes up from the soil, you want to make sure that you cut that off as soon as possible. It will take all of the energy from the Spalding up here at the top. Again, this is a grafted tree. That's really what you want. I would say in 95% of the time when you're looking at fruit trees, you want a grafted variety in some form or fashion. So let's see if we can figure out the height that we need to plant this at. We know what it's planted at now, and that's the correct height, but we need to measure that in regards to the hole and the soil and amendments that we have in. So let's check that out next. In regards to checking your height, you take your shovel, you lay it flat on the ground like this, and then you can see that's how low, I mean, I'm 4 inches down in regards to that height. So I need to build up this soil level so that when I plant this, I will not have issues and it be too low. And most trees end up not doing well because they're planted at the wrong height. Traditionally, people plant them too low. You can plant them too high, but traditionally people plant them too low. So make sure your height's right. Put something flat on top of that hole and make sure that your soil level is going to be right. And then check it again once you get that tree planted. I will say that if you are planting in super sandy soil, you do not need pine bark soil conditioner in my opinion, because it helps with drainage. Again, this is for red clay or clay in general. Now, check our height again, and we are pretty much dead level. Let's get our tree out of the pot and show you how to make sure and take care when you're getting them out. Let's hope this one comes out easy. Alright guys, so let's take our Spalding tree out of the pot. Traditionally what you want to do is kind of squeeze around the pot a little bit and then just turn it up. Got a pretty good root system. Don't want to disturb it too much. It was starting to grow at the bottom a good bit there. I'd also encourage you to make sure, if you can, don't fill your hole all the way in. Forgot about that. That gives you a little bit of room to be able to kind of set that tree. And then again, you got your main root here. You want to be sure and plant right at that level. See that main root there? I'm going to plant at that level. You don't want this being too deep. And you can spread these roots out. I think they'll be all right. And if the graft was a little bit lower, I would kind of worry about which direction it's going. Honestly, probably going to plant it about like this just because of the way that it looks like it's going right now. When you do plant, you want to continually kind of make sure that your height is right. See, now I'm got a little high. See there, my soil height is about right there, and it is too high because the main root is there. So we have to dig that down and make sure we can get it just right. All right guys, so hopefully this makes sense here. You can see the top root is right there. So it is right at the top. You also do not want to mound up a bunch of mulch right around the trunk. That will not go well. So you need to kind of think about that. You really want that mulch to kind of come out, and then you have a little bit of a gap right around the trunk. And you also notice that I mounted up around the outside just a little bit just to catch some water. I found that typically helps, just making sure that things are successful as a whole. Now, the things that you didn't see on camera were, I did find a couple of the gifts of the South. For any of y'all who don't know, the gifts of the South are fire ants. So just remember to be on the lookout of those if you have them in your area. If you don't, be very thankful. They are not really a gift of the South. We got this Spalding pear planted, and now let's just talk about a few other things. We didn't show it on camera this time, but it's extremely important to water your tree in as soon as you get it planted. Another thing that we didn't mention before is that right now, this time of year is the absolute best time to plant. So I would say any time from probably November all the way until February, maybe early March. But in my personal opinion, kind of late January to early March is the absolute best time to plant. And the reason for that, at least in our area, is you usually have some pretty warm afternoons, still got some cooler temperatures, so you're able to kind of not have too much heat stress, and it really allows those roots to get established without stressing from a cold winter storm. Now this winter's been a little bit different. We've actually had 2 cold snaps with snow. That is not typical here. I know that folks in the northern regions are laughing at us, and that's totally fine. We laugh at y'all when y'all say it's hot in the summertime. Another aspect is staking. Right now we're not gonna stake this tree, but we probably will put some protection around it just because of knowing that we do have some deer pressure on this upper side. If any of y'all have been watching us for very long, you know that I have been delaying putting up a fence in some form or fashion multiple years. This year really needs to be the year, but we'll see in regards to when we can get that up. Even something as simple as a little tomato cage with some bird netting around it can protect this tree for at least a year and keep the deer from messing with it. If you just put a tomato cage up and you don't put some kind of bird netting or anything to prevent them from just sticking their head in there, they're gonna nibble on it. Now you might be asking, all right, now what about long term? What do we need to do? We got in the ground, I've planted trees and they've done pretty well and they've leafed out, and then all of a sudden they didn't make it a year or two. In the first spring and summer, you need to water fairly consistently to make sure that the roots are getting water so that they can truly put down a good foundation. The tree might not grow a whole lot in that first year, but you gotta make sure and keep it watered. Again, there's a balance there because you don't want to overwater and have root rot or something like that. But I would encourage you, make sure it gets at least an inch of water per week, if not more than that, depending on your drainage and other climate conditions that you might be running into. If it's gonna be 100 degrees all week in the middle of the summer, you might need to get out there more than one day and give it some water. This is true in most every situation. However, to give yourself that jump start, if you get things planted now, then you certainly won't run into as many issues if you wait until April, May, June, starting to plant then. Give your trees time to get established. Again, we're going to be planting several different trees and plants and shrubs here in the next month or two, and I would strongly encourage you to get out and do the same. All right guys, so this is the kefir. Bartlett. Olympic Giant. Still need to work on pruning for this year. And this is our Frankenstein Bradford pear tree. You can see there are a few branches that did not take and are quite thorny, but many of them took. Look at the size of this thing. That is just crazy. It's a bald one. My good buddy Ronnie over at Early Bird Farms sent me that cutting. So we'll be pruning this back and probably have some cuttings to be able to trade with folks as well. We hope today's video has been helpful for you as you've looked at various different pear trees and kind of learned a little bit about this particular type, which is a Spalding pear. You have chosen the location on your property where you might want to plant it, and maybe where you know for sure you don't want to plant it. You have dug your hole, you've planted at the right height, depth, and nutrients in your hole, and you've also mulched and watered. Again, those are the important steps, and I hope that you were able to learn from today's video. If you did like today's video, I would encourage you to like this video, share it with others on your social media platforms, and don't forget, when you subscribe, I would encourage you to do that as well, to ring that bell down there, like, that's right, Mike Tyson did in the 1980s. That's just a running joke around here. Not sure why that's the tagline, it just happens to be it. Well, that's a good idea, but we do have future plans in regards to might want a pair of gloves. You also might want to avoid the wind. Just kidding, that's only if you're trying to do YouTube. Looking forward to next week and being able to show you guys some more activities that we have going on here at our place, and would love to hear down below exactly what you've been planning and any tips or recommendations that you might have for different pear varieties. Thanks much, guys. Y'all have a wonderful and blessed one.